Yeah, yeah, I am frustrated because I asked for an outfit that was professional and flamboyant, and you bring me this cock shit. Yeah, give me another one. God, I can't keep doing this amateur hour shit. Good evening, Kaiju fans, and welcome to another edition with yours truly, the Kaijuologist. Today's episode will be brought to you by Bacardi Gold Rum. And it's gold for a reason, ladies and gentlemen, because we are talking about the ultimate in gold fiends out there. We will be doing a countdown of, in my opinion, the top King Ghidorah films within the Godzilla franchise. Bottoms up. Ooh, that tastes like an adult situation. Alrighty, so let's just launch into it. No reviews tonight, just a good old fashioned countdown. I'm going to start at the top with my least favorite version of King Ghidorah to grace any Godzilla film, and for several reasons. We're going to start with Godzilla Final Wars. Now, I don't absolutely hate the film. It's not my favorite. I've got some beef with the film. My biggest beef is Monster X at the very end. I loathe that monster. It infuriates me that a film that has done such a nice job reincorporating so many of the forgotten gems of the Showa period, and it goes out with this crap new monster that, in my opinion, looks like a bad Power Rangers villain. He looks like he should be in Rita Repulsa's lair cackling behind Goldar. He looks lousy. He looks too humanoid to be your typical kaiju. I don't care for him. Even more, I find it very disrespectful to the character of King Ghidorah to suggest that this atrocity of a kaiju is the pre-evolution of Godzilla's best foe. King Ghidorah is the Joker to Godzilla's Batman. He brings it. He is an epic villain. People love King Ghidorah. You don't mess with him like this. And I know the fan base, I hear you guys, well, that was technically Kaiser Ghidorah. I don't care. It was a three-headed monster, a dragon monster that shoots lasers and lightning out of its mouth, and it's in a Godzilla film. It's in a Godzilla film that is, in so many ways, an homage to Destroy All Monsters, which ends with King Ghidorah. It was King Ghidorah, and it was a lousy-looking King Ghidorah at that. It looked puppety. I didn't understand the weird, funky blue texture going on. I didn't care for it. There were so many stronger ways that film could have gone out. You didn't have to disrespect one of my personal favorite kaiju. All right. So the next one we're going to have to take up is Godzilla vs. Gigan. It's just a problematic film for King Ghidorah. As I mentioned, he is one of the ultimate badass kaijus in the Toho universe. And so it's problematic to treat him as an ally to another kaiju, in my opinion. I don't care for the fact that he's just the side monster to Gigan. I also, it causes a lot of problems in the film, frankly. One, I think it diminishes Gigan's impact. Think how much more exciting and interesting that film could have been to see Gigan fight Godzilla and Anguirus and hold his own, on his own, really give it to these two monsters. You could have elevated Gigan up the food chain by demonstrating what a good fighter he is instead of having to rush over to King Ghidorah. And unfortunately in this film, King Ghidorah is the source of so much lousy stock footage, just all over the place. I mean, to the point that even the continuity of the battle is it's a nightmare. You're flip-flopping from daytime to nighttime. It's a mess all over the place. And it's also probably the worst, again, in my opinion, that King Ghidorah looks in the Showa series. The suit's looking a little haggard. The props aren't good. I mean, that flying prop when he bursts out of the weird space sapphire he's trapped in looks awful. And then his movement, the prop just isn't handled well. The suit and the props aren't handled well. King Ghidorah almost looks tired and lethargic. And that's not the King Ghidorah we love. The King Ghidorah we love is an entity of pure utter chaos. He is wild, and his energy is just completely diminished in this film. So unfortunately, not a strong entry. So then we'll move into the next one, and I know I'm probably gonna offend a lot of the fan base with this one, but I've got my reasons here. I'm gonna hit up GMK, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Um, I used that parallel or comparison of the Joker and Batman. The problem here, and I've heard some good defenses on this, I just can't make it sit well with me, is that King Ghidorah is a villain. He's very powerful. He's a very exciting villain. Whenever King Ghidorah is involved, you know shit's gonna be good. And to have him, first of all, I think his character in this film is not well developed. I don't really get much of a sense. I know he's the Guardian, and actually his look aesthetically could work for this part, but I don't care for this costume either. I understand originally this film was supposed to be Baragon, Varan, and Anguirus, and I think it would have made a lot more sense. I think that poor director kind of, got strong-armed into using King Ghidorah just for the box office returns. He's a good commodity for the company, which I get. I understand. We want these movies to keep going. But to have him be like a good monster, and not just that, but he feels very weak compared to Godzilla. He doesn't feel, I know he does put up a good fight, all said and done, but it never feels like he might take this battle. It feels like from the get-go he is wildly overpowered by Godzilla. I know it's all part of this plot, and GMK, it's a very strong kaiju film. I admit I have problems, and I'll get into this later. Tonight's about King Ghidorah, but I have problems with the characterization of these monsters within the movie. I feel like we got too far away, and King Ghidorah is the prime example of this. It doesn't feel like King Ghidorah to me. I mentioned that Varan was originally supposed to be one of the kaiju in this film, which, God, why couldn't we have had that film? And apparently one of the suit designers, that's where they took some of their cues from for King Ghidorah's heads and the face. It doesn't work for me. He doesn't look particularly vicious. He looks kind of puppety and silly, which admittedly, I think there is a point to this film. I think those monsters, I love most of those monster designs, actually. All of them outside King Ghidorah I love. I think as part of the director's intention that the monsters don't look hyper-realistic. They have a little more cartoony flair to them, and I think that's an important part of the story he's telling. That said, it works for the other monsters, and King Ghidorah he looks kind of silly. The heads look kind of truncated. They're not as long and sinewy and wild. Sorry guys, I just don't care for it. So from here on out, now we're into films that I feel really do the destroyer of worlds, King Ghidorah. They do him justice. We're gonna have to move into Destroy All Monsters then. It just, unfortunately, he doesn't have a huge role to play, but he is a great climax to this film. This is how you handle King Ghidorah. He shows up and you throw him at 8 other monsters, and yes, he gets his ass kicked, but he puts up a spectacular fight. Like, this is one of the most exciting, engaging kaiju battle royale. Absolute carnage here. That shot with him flying up and Anguirus hanging off the neck, and Godzilla stomping on Ghidorah's throat. Oh, it's brutal. It's deliciously brutal, but it's the proper way to handle him. He is the big monstrous villain in this universe usually. The only monster who seems to kind of get similar status is Mechagodzilla, and Mechagodzilla's character and narrative changes in much more wild ways than King Ghidorah ever does. So I think it's a great moment for him. The suit's starting to look a little funky. There are some problematic shots, but that energy I was talking about before, that King Ghidorah is this crazy, wild, untamed beast. He is just utterly sporadic. We still have some of that character and energy there, and that's what I love in this film. So we'll move in then to Invasion of Astro Monster. Again, this is King Ghidorah at his prime. This is an excellent representation. He's menacing. The suit still looks really good. Some of the special effect shots are fantastic. Yes, some stock footage, but we do get some really nice new shots. I mean, especially that battle on Planet X. It's classic. It is just perfect, crazy pop culture kaiju moment that you don't ever actually get again. You never get to see the monsters really duke it out in space like this. Um, the only reason I can't mark this film up higher, uh, for me, it has to do a bit with the fact that he's under control of the Xylians. It's not necessarily King Ghidorah himself being an evil badass. He gets like a few seconds of it at the very end of the film where he re-engages Godzilla and Rodan, but it's not a film about him just being the main villain, I suppose. And so it kind of diminishes his character and personality to me just a little bit. That said, this again exemplary case of Showa King Ghidorah at some of his finest. Second to final film, you can probably understand where this is going now. Godzilla versus King Ghidorah, 1991. This film competes actively with Destroya. There it was. These two in the Heisei series, they're like my second favorites, and I kind of waffle between them. It's a great entry in the series. It's got that perfect crowd pleasing, some nice elements from the Showa series, some nice new aspects to the whole, I guess, the science fiction genre of Godzilla. What I like about this, and I know I'm going to sound like a hypocrite for a moment here, I love innovation. I think if you're going to reinvent a monster, if you're going to reintroduce a film franchise, a TV series, a comic book, whatever it is, find a good justification to reinvent it. Find something challenging and new, but you can't stray too far from the nature of the source material. And so that's why I absolutely applaud GMK for trying to do something different with King Ghidorah. It just, for me, it doesn't work. It's too far away from the actual character of this monster. This film, however, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, is the perfect example. We actually get an origin story for this monster. And what I like the best about it is it gives some very interesting parallels between Godzilla throughout. As I've mentioned, this idea of like Batman and the Joker, how about like Tim Burton's Batman is interesting in that Batman and the Joker are constantly kind of helping create each other. And in this way, Godzilla and King Ghidorah in this film have these kind of similar, paths going forward. They both start off, we see the Godzillasaurus. He's not necessarily a violent, awful monster, unless you're an American soldier on his island, then he's violent to you. And same with the Dorats. And then because of the people from the future interfering with all this, Godzilla's transported. He still ends up having to get mutated, which I can only imagine is probably a pretty traumatic experience for any living monster, let alone this poor lonely dinosaur. He's now even bigger, stronger. The film definitely puts into his narrative that Godzilla's even more of an atomic destructive beast now because the mutation from the submarine, I guess, was even more potent. That said, now the Dorats, who like the Godzillasaurus are relatively peaceful, kind of cute animals, they now have had to go through the traumatic experience of being fused together, mutated horribly into this giant, crazy, violent monster. And it just adds kind of a nice little poetic narrative to these two monsters who have always been, hand in hand and nemesis. They are the arch rivals to each other. And so it's kind of fun to see an origin story. Originally the Showa series, we talk about, he's a monster from space. He destroyed Mars at one point. We don't really know, is he part of a larger species? Did a alien race create him? What he is the Heath Ledger Joker in this analogy. He shows up, he fucks shit up, and his agenda doesn't matter because the actions the monster are taking are so much more exciting than worrying about an origin story. That said, I like with Godzilla versus King Ghidorah that we get, it adds a layer of tragedy to the monster. Um, and then, of course, we get to Mecha King Ghidorah, who I love. I love this kaiju. Dear God, why could Final Wars not have gone out with Mecha King Ghidorah? Somebody, please bring this beautiful kaiju back to life. I love it. I love the cyborg angle, and it actually it helps solve one of the problems of this film in that I love this design for King Ghidorah. I think he looks excellent. He looks feral. He looks mean. He looks even more dragon-like. It in some ways it does trump the Showa series in my opinion. However, and this is a complaint I have almost across the board with the Heisei series, I like most of the monster designs and updates, but the execution of the suits and props is miserable. It's terrible. King Ghidorah doesn't frankly suffer as much as Rodan and Mothra do. God, what they did to Mothra in the Heisei series is a utter travesty. But he looks a little stiff. He's not as organic and wild as in the Showa series. They still missed it by this much. That said, when we introduce Mecha King Ghidorah, it solves this problem. He's a cyborg now. He's half robot. It makes sense that he isn't the flailing being of chaos that he used to be. It's a great film, and I love Mecha King Ghidorah. It's fun too to see you get to see all these steps through King Ghidorah's life cycle within this cycle of films. I mean, and that's an awesome thing. So then, wrapping this up, obviously, you've probably guessed it by now, my top favorite is the original Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. I never know how to... I think in this film we were calling him Ghidra the whole time, which... Yeah, I slip. I slip because I've heard all these movies so many times. Sometimes I call him different things. He's King Ghidorah in my heart. He is the king. He is the king badass. I really like this film. I think this is just... It's fun popcorn kaiju. It's a very critical point in the Showa series too, in that we see Godzilla's character evolve, and the introduction too of King Ghidorah. It almost evolves the whole universe. That it creates more, I guess, maybe a dichotomy of bad monsters and then really bad monsters that the monsters we normally worry about we now kind of have to rely on. And that's a motif that gets used a lot. Some people obviously argue to the detriment of the series. I think it was a very natural and actually healthy progression. I think it's where if the series was going to survive, it had to go, so I can't fault them too much. Anyway, Ghidorah, like I was kind of touching on this, I kind of love that there isn't a whole lot of backstory. You know, we have the Martian prophetess who explains, Ghidorah destroyed her world. She's from Mars. Mars is this wasteland now because of Ghidorah. And there's not even an explanation of like he eats the planet's energy or that he does anything productive. He shows up. He's like my cat in the morning. He shows up just to fuck shit up, and there's no agenda to it, and then he's out. And it's just kind of, it's fun. It's fun. It's wild. This is where we get our initial like monster brawl. And that's how this monster is that awesome, that until now Toho is mostly doing, one monster on monster. I guess with the two Mothra larvas, you've got a three-way going there. But this is the four-way crazy, insane, epic battle. This sets up, the blueprint, the foundation down the road for Destroy All Monsters, even to Gigan, Megalon, some of the bigger clashes, GMK. This is where it all starts. And you gotta hand it to Toho. I kind of brought this up when I was talking about Godzilla or Mothra versus Godzilla. These two films are released in the same year. And so I'm sure that they staggered some of these production schedules, but still these are two wildly ambitious kaiju films in comparison to what they had done, especially with Ghidorah the three-headed monster, to have four monsters. One is... Even the concept of Ghidorah is so much more complex than what they've been playing around with. 3 heads, 2 wings, 2 tails. It's moving, it's mobile, it flies, it shoots lightning beams. it is an insane and spectacular monster. And I mean, similar to Rodan, the special effect shots they pull off here in 1964, I guess probably a lot of the filming in 63, but it still looks so good that we're seeing stock footage of it like a decade later. And if you don't know the movies, you don't recognize them the way most kaiju fans recognize certain shots being overused. I don't think you would notice that you could slip a special effect shot from Ghidorah into the 70s. The special effects and the way they brought Ghidorah to life is so good. He's got this crazy, frenetic, wild energy, and this is the Ghidorah I love. It's almost like the three heads are trying to escape each other. They're just utterly wild. This is a monster of anarchy. I love it. I love King Ghidorah, one of my favorite monsters. Yeah, you know what? I think that's a good wrap up for the evening. So anyway, thank you for, hopefully you've gotten a chance to check out some of the other videos on the channel. By all means, I welcome questions, I welcome criticisms, please, but, angry ranting trolls, I'm not going to placate, I don't give a fuck. But I like to hear other people's opinion on these things, or if there's some nuance to some of the other films you think I've missed or details, by all means, I would love to. I want to learn more as well. And please, I encourage you to check out some of the other videos. More are on their way. Anyway, I can barely see in these things. There we go. All right, I will be signing off for the evening from Denver, Colorado. We are the Mile High City, and we are getting higher all the time.